Hi, name's Matthew Jester, making a quick video here. So I have my friend Shonda on the phone, and she says hello, hello. Anyways, um, so this video, I'll go ahead and just get started with the introduction, but it's just gonna be me and her trying to articulate a specific situation that the hypnosis is inhibiting me from being able to articulate by myself. So she's gonna help me out with it. Anyways, I have a certificate of completion just showing that I'm competent and certified in the field of hypnosis. And then I'm just going to read my general introduction here. So please watch my video, Hypnosis, Abuse, and Speech Inhibition. I will leave a link to watch the video in the description. I will also leave additional links in the description of other relevant videos. I've been abused with hypnosis, and my ability to speak is being inhibited with hypnosis, which is why I have to read everything when I make videos. If you notice me stuttering, speaking slowly, being unable to speak clearly, or any other difficulty speaking, I explain in detail the specific methods and techniques that are being used to inhibit my ability to speak in my video, Hypnosis, Abuse, and Speech Inhibition. These issues speaking occur consistently in each of my videos, specifically within the first 3 minutes. The hypnosis inhibiting my ability to speak is often very noticeable throughout my videos, and I will leave a list of the various hypnotic commands that are specifically being used to inhibit my ability to speak that can be recognized in my body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and speech patterns in the description. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So I recorded some videos last couple days. Well, I mean mostly yesterday, trying to do the same thing. Shonda?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
here.
And
Yes, he has. Definitely, he has.
oh, that's cool. I see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, so basically the situation here. You remember how I was talking about those death threat letters that I analyzed?
Yes.
So, the situation is a little bit complicated, but it's not too complicated, right? I mean, like I could understand maybe taking 20 or 30 minutes in total to do it, but not like 4 or 5 hours to get like a sentence done. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah. You see what I'm
And
saying?
you've been
Like,
having, yeah, and you've been having some struggles, I've noticed.
that's why you're on the phone with me right now.
Yes,
It's
most
that bad.
definitely.
All right. So, I do have to explain the situation here, right? And
Okay.
I'll even tell you some of the examples. So you remember how I don't know if you remember this or not specifically actually. Do you remember how I mentioned that there were drawings in the letters?
Right.
All right. So the thing is, I was hypnotized and cued um to cued to like remember certain metaphors that they told me um
Okay.
when I saw those pictures and those drawings before he
Right.
drew those pictures.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that means that it was premeditated, even the pictures.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of get the situation, like that's a pretty big deal.
Yes, it is.
All right. So especially because this was a celebrity, well, I mean, it doesn't make it any more significant that it was a celebrity, but it will be more it'll stand out a lot more because it's a celebrity.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyways, um, okay, like I'll give you an example right now. Do you remember me telling you about the song "Cradles" by Suburban?
Yes.
Okay. So, like, you remember how that had a pretty like specific type of meaning
Mhm.
regarding the hypnotic seal?
Yes.
All right. So, with that one specifically, all right, when I was looking at the pictures, and this is what they did too. This is where you're gonna be kind of like, whoa, I see what you're saying, right? Because
Right.
um, like it's a big deal that these things were premeditated, and what they ended up doing was like, it was relatively significant, right? Um,
Right.
and oh, also, so these are called isomorphic metaphors too. Do you know the difference between an isomorphic metaphor and a normal metaphor?
like an ink block test or something?
Not at all.
Okay.
So an iso like say for example a normal metaphor, right? Like a
Oh,
normal
okay.
metaphor, like in the situation with hypnosis, could be like explaining a situation that applies to like almost anybody's generalized situation, right? Almost anyone could relate to it.
Right.
An isomorphic metaphor is one that is pertaining to an individual specific situation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So like it's like not everybody could relate to it, but and like it specifically is referencing a specific situation in an individual's life.
Right.
Okay. So and typically like with hypnosis how this would be done is like you know they would relay a message to the person in the form of a metaphor, and then the person would relate to the metaphor, but they wouldn't just like specify that like that's what we're doing to you, right?
Right.
Yeah. um so like this is a little bit this is a little bit like different than just like a story, but it's still like a figure of speech or a metaphor, symbolism. And all right, so there was the one where okay, so there were some pictures in there that he drew. There were triangles, right?
Right.
There were also crosses and what might have looked like eyes.
Right.
And then there was like one or two like pictures of triangles that were like on fire, it looked like, with some eyes in
Uh-huh.
it too. All right, so anyways, um I don't know if you watched the first video, the one that I had completed on just the hypnosis and the drawings when I was in jail.
Mm, probably not. You'll have to probably send me a link to
I'll
jog
send it
my
to you.
memory.
You
But
can
maybe I
watch
have.
it. You can watch it when you have a chance. But
Okay.
anyways, um, I yeah, I'll send that to you later. But
Okay.
anyways, sorry. Oh, so like I was hypnotized to draw on the walls of the jail, right?
You were
Um,
what?
I was hypnotized to draw on the walls of the jail.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason for that actually, was because, like, I mean, if you like kind of listen to it, it's kind of like creepy and everything because a lot of them are just referencing death and murder, right?
Right.
A lot of the pictures, and then
Mm-hmm.
like Eminem had the album "Music to Be Murdered By,"
Right.
so then like in my head while I was doing it, right, it was mostly about murder and stuff like that, but I also at the same time just thought about like music.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? And that like changes the meaning entirely.
Right.
Takes something very dark and just turns it into like, oh, it's a song on the radio.
Right.
Yeah. But regardless, so I was hit with the hieroglyphs, right? Well, I mean, with the pictures on the wall, I was hypnotized to think that like they were hieroglyphs
Mm-hmm.
or like hieroglyphs, kind of, right? Not technically, you know what I mean? Because a gel is different than a pyramid, but you kind of get the gist of it, right? They're both on the walls of a building.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, and I was hypnotized to think of hieroglyphs, um, like because the pictures reminded me of drawing on the walls of the jail, and then the pyramid, right? Well, the triangles, represented pyramids. No duh, right? Can kind of see the
Right.
correlation there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the metaphor, right?
Right.
And all right. So then like and this is also like the way that they did it too. Was they these metaphors I was hypnotized to remember slowly over the period of like a couple hours instead of all at once. And it would only be like a portion of a metaphor for the most part, instead of an entire metaphor. And before like like say for example, I would move on before I was before the hypnosis allowed it was cued to have me remember the next metaphor, right?
Right.
The other metaphors were repressed from my memory.
Oh, I see.
And the reason for that was so I didn't write it down and so that I wouldn't think that they were significant or important.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, that's messed up, right?
Right. I mean, especially your partial metaphor. I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Partial. Give me partial. Don't give me the whole thing.
Well, so oh yeah, that's right. I only gave you part of that, right? So then the fire, right?
Mhm.
This is where it becomes like even more of an isomorphic metaphor.
Mhm.
Was the fire was supposed to mean remind made I was cued to think of the song Cradles by Suburban
Right.
because the cradle on the album cover in the song
Uh huh.
was on fire.
Oh, yikes.
That makes sense, right?
Right.
All right, so even going even further into the metaphor, I was hypnotized to think that it meant child slave labor
Okay.
because it was once believed that the pyramids were built by slaves.
Right.
And then the song Cradles, right? Well, Cradles is a reference to children, right? Because, like,
Mhm.
you're not going to put a teenager or, like, even like like a kid over the age of 5 years old in a cradle. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, like 2 year olds, 3 year olds, anyways. Um, so you get the point there.
Right.
So,
I get it.
yeah, you I mean, that's kind of a little bit pretty specific, right?
Mhm.
Because, um, like, even trying to say that it represents child slave labor, right? Well, that doesn't necessarily mean it does, just because of the fire or the pyramid on fire by itself. Um, but if you take into the aspect that, if you take into the concept of like, the fact that it was once believed that the pyramids were built by slaves.
Right. The
Yeah,
Hebrew.
yeah, you get the concept. So I mean, like, that was one example of it, and it's not exactly very normal either, right?
Right.
And that was also before I knew what the song meant.
Right.
Yeah, but and then like there was something else. Oh, and this one was pretty confusing too. Well, all right, so there was also a picture of a flower that he drew, right?
Mhm.
Okay, in the picture of the flower, um, he wrote Lucifer next to it, and then he wrote an arrow to pointing towards the flower from the word Lucifer,
Yeah.
right? So the like
Right.
flower was named Lucifer,
Oh,
and
I thought it was a ram's head. But no, go ahead.
well, the flower was named Lucifer in the drawings on the letters, right?
Uh huh.
All right, so Lucifer is like the devil's name, right?
Right.
Okay. So I was also hypnotized to think drawing on the walls of the jail was worshiping the devil,
Dang.
and that investigating the president for committing murder, was worshiping the devil too.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah, I know, right? Because that's just part of the entire investigation. Just have to, start worshiping the devil throughout it. It's just not a
Gosh.
complete investigation without that, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, so I mean, you kind of get the point, trying to like make me look bad or whatever, right? Trying to discourage it too. But
Mhm.
regardless, um, so okay, and then the flower. I was also hypnotized to think of did you SpongeBob her, right? And I was like,
Mhm.
what? And
Yeah, that's what I was thinking just a second. I'm like, wait, what?
yeah. All right. So the flower, okay, so the flower kind of like I mean, it wasn't necessarily like your ordinary flower with a like round fat petals, right? Round and wide petals.
Right.
It was kind of more like a viney, kind of like seaweed or kelp.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or even kind of like a pot leaf, just pretty narrow and long.
Okay. Yeah, narrow and long and thin.
Yeah, and actually the leaves on it were actually even wavy too. The petals on the flower.
It actually looks more like a fan.
Did you see it?
No, I just know what a marijuana plant looks like.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, like that, like, the marijuana plant. I mean, it really kind of depends on how you would draw it, right? But regardless, what I'm talking about is just the flower and the picture that he drew, right?
Right.
Specifically. So like
Mhm.
it was also kind of like wavy, and I was hypnotized to think of SpongeBob because, and like okay, so I was like, so like I was hypnotized to think like, did you SpongeBob her, right? And I
Uh
was
huh.
sitting there trying to figure out what it meant for like 5 minutes, right?
Right.
I couldn't figure it out, and then all right, so SpongeBob references kelp like a few times in the cartoons,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
All right. So and like kelp does kind of have that shape of the leaves, very thin, long, and wavy.
Uh huh.
Yeah. And then I was hypnotized to think of seaweed, right? Because that's what kelp is.
Yeah.
It's seaweed.
Mhm.
And so instead of like potweed or landweed, it's seaweed, right?
Right.
And I was hypnotized to think of that, right? It meant SpongeBob and her because weed was the devil's lettuce.
The devil's lettuce. Oh gosh.
Do you get the
Oh god.
metaphor though?
Huh?
Do you get the metaphor?
Yeah.
That's why the kelp flower looked like that's why the kelp flower was named Lucifer because it's the devil's lettuce.
Right.
That's like you see what I'm saying, and it's like all right, especially because each of those parts of the metaphor, right,
Right.
took like 5 minutes to be cued in my memory.
Okay.
So you could kind of imagine like that's what I'm also trying to describe specifically too, and what I'm trying to write down because the hypnosis has been making it very difficult for me to do. Um, right. So like one of the ways that they described it was I mean there's a couple of different ways that you could describe it metaphorically too as well, right? So each of these was like I mean that is kind of up to interpretation, right? But
Right.
it is a little bit too coincidental too when you think about it.
Okay.
If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Um, because
So.
everything and all like is pretty highly related.
Right.
Um,
I'm sorry, but I can't stop laughing at the fact that the devil's lettuce.
I know, right? So
Also, there's a lot of weird names for drugs, but that's just too funny.
Well, I mean, that's the devil's lettuce for you, but like yeah, you know what I mean? Like some of that kind of that stuff like because you know, like the hieroglyphs to the pyramids to the fire and the cradles and child slave labor.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like those are all things that normally don't have a like direct connection, right? Are completely unrelated, like that are typically pretty unrelated, right?
Right.
Um, except for like pyramids and hieroglyphs. Those are the only things that are like basically directly correlated or related.
Right.
Um, and then just having to have that happen coincidentally in a, you know what I mean, like in a drawing,
Mm-hmm.
is pretty unusual. And then um, you know, correlating a SpongeBob seaweed flower with the devil. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that's a little bit
Extreme.
well, I mean, you know, it's weird because it loops back around and it makes sense.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And you know, so like with an incomplete metaphor, right? So like with only like
Right.
one or two of those parts of the metaphor instead of the entire thing, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
make any sense and the symbolism isn't there, right?
Right.
Like you know, if you just explain like kelp and SpongeBob, right? And the flower, I mean, you know, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the flower be SpongeBob, right? I mean, it might kind of look like kelp, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But overall, like there's no symbolism there that represents, you know, the devil's lettuce yet.
Right.
Yeah. Um and in order to prevent me from even being able to describe any of that, because the drawings are pretty unusual to be included in like a death threat, right? Especially like the flower, like pretty cool flower. I'm gonna kill you, but this is a cool flower. His name is Lucifer.
Right.
That's just not like wait what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't really make very much sense.
No, it does not.
But you know, so like by breaking up the metaphors, it seemed very insignificant. They did that so that I wouldn't write it down,
Mm-hmm.
because if I wrote it down, then they couldn't repress it from my memory.
Right.
So like it moreover felt like I was just sitting there like waiting, like looking for clues, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Being kind of like led on, like
Uh-huh.
looking for clues. Just seeing what would end up happening, right? Because I was like, okay, well, I mean, none of these specifically seemed significant enough that like I'd be able to use that as an example and have any credibility
Right.
until I started like trying to organize everything and put it all together. It was kind of like you know, a puzzle piece, or like let's say for example, you know, like a one way they describe this also like well, I mean, you could call each of those, you know, like portions of the metaphors as puzzle pieces,
Right.
you know, to make a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, like they don't like really make much sense, and they're not very useful to describe individually, but collectively, and when you put them together, they make sense, and you get a picture, right?
Right.
All right. And then you know, also the aspect to kind of like, say, for example, with a medication,
Mm-hmm.
they called this like dividing the dose.
Okay.
So like kind of like say for example you take a pill and then you divide it into like four different pieces,
Right.
and then you know, like split it up over like 4 hours or 2 hours, right?
Right.
Then I mean, you know, like it doesn't exactly, it's not exactly very noticeable or significant individually, You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So that's another way that they described it.
Okay.
Because that's like what literally what they did. They would take like 1/8 of the metaphor, and then they would give that to me every like 15 or 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that way I wouldn't write it down and be like, well, I mean, that's not exactly worth writing down. And
Yeah, it
then
sounds like it is.
and then I'd have it repressed from my memory. And that alone just kind of shows you like, wait, this is kind of worth writing down, isn't it? If they went to those
Right.
lengths just to keep me from writing it down, it must be worth writing it down.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, the story and like the explanation of how they did it to me is evidence in itself, that it happened.
Right.
Or else like I would have just been like cute to have this like rush of thoughts, like whoa, right, like mind blowing type of thing, like what they told me about this before it ever happened. You know what I mean? But instead, it was kind of
Right.
like little tiny clues that I didn't know how to phrase it, right?
Right.
Very indirect, confusing, and vague. So I need to put that into words.